There was a time when a handheld was the king of 2D gaming. When everything was transitioning to 3D graphics, this portable system continued on with 2D graphics, and was praised for doing so. It was considered a portable Super Nintendo, and we couldn't get enough of it. As the years go by, gaming keeps getting better and better. Graphics are far more superior now than they were just a few years ago. 4K is now a common, expected gaming resolution. With the two graphical powerhouses on the cusp of releasing their new gaming machines, I thought I'd go back to the humble 2000s and reminisce about one of my favorite handhelds. In the early 2000s, I was faced with a reality I hadn't expected to be in. My most recent Nintendo handheld was my original Game Boy. It was also my only portable system. I had completely skipped over the Game Boy Pocket and the Game Boy Color. My brother had a Sega Game Gear, but I wasn't allowed to play it. This was my only reprieve in the car when we were traveling. Granted, I never asked my parents for a new one. Around this time, I was into music and skateboarding. If I wasn't playing a guitar, I was out skating. I really didn't game all that much. I had home consoles that I played to death, but my handheld game was lacking severely. Little did I know that I was due for a miracle. My father had to get surgery that summer, which meant that I had to spend an entire day at the hospital. My only entertainment outlet was, you guessed it, my Game Boy. It was pretty pathetic back then. This setup was so dated. My dad was just about to be rolled back into the operating room when, bam, all the power was lost at the hospital. As it turned out, a hang glider had recreated himself into some power lines. But don't worry, he recovered just fine. But that meant that we had to reschedule the surgery. A few weeks later, we were headed back to that very hospital when all of a sudden my parents pulled up to a Kmart store. We walked our way back to the electronics. The clouds parted, and right then and there, a beam of light shone upon the locked electronics cabinet. Because I looked so pathetic during our last visit to the hospital, my mom and dad decided to gift me a new handheld. Before me was my choice of Game Boy Advance systems and a wall of games. I was given permission to get a handheld and 2 games. With no hesitation, I picked out the Glacier model. I had liked this specific color ever since I had seen it in the cabinets at the stores. I landed on 2 games. Because they were all out of Mario games, I chose to get Wario Land 4 and Mario Kart Super Circuit. Keep in mind, I hadn't played any current portable systems. I wasn't sure what the graphics were going to be like. I was strictly a home console kid. At this point in time, with the help of my older brothers, my parents transitioned us from a Nintendo family to a PlayStation family. Here's a little background into where I was in gaming at the time. The Super Nintendo had run its course, and when it came time to get a new one, instead of doing the obvious next step with the N64, we got a PlayStation. Because, and I quote from one of my brothers, all of my friends are getting PlayStations, so a PlayStation is what we got. I was a little upset with the decision because I absolutely loved my Super Nintendo. That Super Nintendo was my very own, and I played it every chance I got. I thought the N64 would be the new and improved SNES, and now I wouldn't get the chance to play it. However, the PlayStation was now ours, and I fell in love with it. Tomb Raider, Crash Bandicoot, and Croc were all I needed to stay happy. Metal Gear Solid was an amazing surprise, and Riven, the sequel to Myst, was mind-blowing on the PlayStation, even though it came with 5 discs and the transitions were long. The PS1 is very important to me on a gaming level, but that's not to take away how much the Super Nintendo meant to me. I hold them both in very high regard. After the PlayStation was waxing old, my parents went rogue and got me, yes, me alone, a PlayStation 2. It was the hottest item during the holidays, and I got one, and I also fell in love with that. So you can see how disappointed I was that I had to play the old Game Boy during this hospital stay. Yeah, I know, poor me and all my gaming consoles. The screen on the Game Boy is pitiful. The amount of ghosting is alarming, and borderline unplayable. In a pinch I can do it, but it's not ideal. In the car, I cracked open the GBA box and admired the device I was cradling in my hands. This Game Boy's design was a major departure from what Nintendo had done in the past. First off, this thing is in landscape mode. The screen is in the middle, between your hands, unlike the previous Game Boy models which placed your hands below the screen. Nintendo adopted the look of the Sega Game Gear and the Atari Lynx. This form factor is my preferred way to play Game Boy games. It's way more comfortable than the cramped button placement on previous models. That's why people have been modding these with backlit screens. The screen is also presented in widescreen. It's not that tiny square. It's a nice touch I really like. I think that's the thing I liked most about it when I first played it. After admiring the plastic machine, I popped in 2 AA batteries, inserted Wario Land 4, and hit the power. Why isn't the screen lighting up? Yeah, the box lied. Doesn't this look like the screen would be backlit? But to me, that didn't matter, because I saw the graphics that were being displayed. This looks like Super Nintendo graphics. Holy crap, they've done it. This is like playing a portable Super Nintendo. The 16-bit look was so welcoming to me. I had forgotten how great side-scrolling games could look and play. I didn't even care much about the gameplay. I was so amazed at what this Game Boy was displaying. Just a few hours ago I was playing this. Now look at the detail and colors that are exploding into my eyeballs and being interpreted by my brain. Simply spectacular. After my initial shock, because I had never seen one of these in action, I got to playing my 2 new games. I hadn't played a Wario game before, so I didn't know what to expect. It looked like a platformer, and that's all I was looking for at the time. Boy, is it a platformer. An amazing platformer. I was engrossed in that single game for the entire day and a car trip back home. It quickly became one of my all-time favorite games. Wario doesn't feel like Mario. He's heavier and has all sorts of different objectives in these stages. I had so much fun discovering everything this game has. If you haven't played this game, why not? Go get it somehow. After running through a pair of AA's, I decided to give Wario 4 a rest. After all, I had 2 new games. Again, I didn't know anything about Super Circuit. I really liked Super Mario Kart on the SNES, and I had never touched a Mario Kart 64. I didn't know what to expect. Luckily for me, it wasn't too far off from what I had already played. It's very much like Super Mario Kart. I also fell in love with this game. Mario Kart on the go, and it wasn't bad. Playing Mario Kart in the car was crazy. I love the 2D graphics of this game. It looks like a graphical improvement over the Super Nintendo game, which I really liked. After I played all the way through Mario Kart, I had a brilliant idea. I would put in one of my old games, just to see if it would work. I thought I'd trick it into believing it was a GBA game. How in the heck would this work? Look how stupid this is. When I heard the beep, I thought it was the same beep you get when you don't have a game inserted. But then, the unthinkable happened. The game started playing. It was actually running, and not just in black and white, or green and lighter green in my case. It was running those games in color. It was built with backwards compatibility with all the legacy Game Boy games. That includes the Game Boy Color. It's an all-in-one Game Boy, and I think that's its best feature. Now you can pack around only one console and play all your Game Boy games. If you missed out on the other consoles, kind of like me, then you had a chance to still play those games with this console. Around when the Game Boy Advance was current, original Game Boy games were very inexpensive. Those games were 2 generations back at that point. The Game Boy Advance isn't all roses. There are things I don't like about it. Well, thing I don't like. This screen is a major disappointment. Like I said previously, the box is very misleading. I can't believe I was okay with it when I first played it. It's surprisingly dark. I can't believe how impressed I was with it. Though, again, I was used to playing the original Game Boy, which also has an unlit screen, and has severe ghosting. And the lighting must be very bright in order to really get anything out of this. Even in ideal conditions, it's not very impressive. I can't believe it was released this way. I mean, it was 2001 when it came out. There had been plenty of portable systems with backlit screens by this time. Well before this time. The Game Gear was released in 1990, 11 years before this. True, that screen also wasn't all that great, but at least you could play it in the dark. To remedy this, third-party companies made external lights that would shine on the screen. It never worked all that well. The light was pretty weak and never lit up the entire screen. I had one of these, and I even used it in the daytime. The problem with lights like this is, they have to aim directly at the screen in order to reflect light off of it. That means it hangs right over the display. You have to either play with your head at an angle, or light half of the screen to get the light out of your field of view. It's something I had to get used to, but again, I didn't know any better. This was normal for the time. It was either this or not play at all. I also had one of those magnifiers. Yeah, they made those for the GBA as well. It had lights too, but I was never sure on how to use it. Does it lay flat? If so, it doesn't really enhance the gameplay. Do you raise it up and have the magnifying glass at an angle? This also doesn't enhance the gameplay. I actually tolerated the twisty light over this thing. It's not ideal, but at least you can see part of the screen. It would take another 2 years to get a Game Boy with a lit screen. The Game Boy Advance SP was released in 2003 with a front-lit display. It washed out the image, but is miles ahead of the original model. You could now play in the dark and have the whole screen lit. Fast forward another 2 years and Nintendo would finally give us a properly backlit screen. This is how these games were meant to be played. But I'm not talking about these models in this video. I'll revisit these in another one. The Game Boy Advance is an advanced Game Boy. It has a widescreen display, a more comfortable console design with a landscape button layout, and bigger triggers. It can also play every Game Boy game you most likely have, and it plays those games in color. The graphics are fantastic and hold up even today. Some of these games have become all-time classics. And some all-time classics have been remade to be played in these graphics. Graphics are far superior now than they were just a few years ago. As the years go by, gaming keeps getting better and better. There was a time when a handheld was the king of 2D gaming, and that handheld was the Game Boy Advance.